Welcome to the Vaisakhi London Podcast on the theme of Sabgare Khalsa, recorded live at Vaisakhi London at Trafalgar Square. This series delves into the spirit of Khalsa leadership, empowerment and global legacy through the stories of past and present, and against this vast, real bustling, beautiful backdrop of so many people, so many different cultures, so many different backgrounds coming together for Vaisakhi celebrations here in the square in our intimate kind of makeshift podcast studio, live in the open space here in central London, exploring the ideological and the educational foundations that led to the establishment of the Khalsa Raj, understanding those principles that underpin this sovereign state. And that's really a crucial part in understanding our legacy, our history as Sikhs in 2025. Now, joining us on today's episode is Harwinder Singh, who is a long-serving director and volunteer at the Sikh Education Council, who has over 2 decades of experience in Sikh studies. And Harwinder has been instrumental in developing programs that connect individuals to Sikh history, but also Sikh ideology as well. And he serves also as the editor of Sikh Suneha, and the Sikh Education Council's quarterly publication, and is the convener of their comprehensive 4-year Sikh Studies course. So together we're going to be discussing how the teachings of Guru Granth Sahib Ji and Sikh history have shaped this concept of a Khalsa Raj, but at the same time how these principles continue to influence the Sikh education community empowerment of today. Harwinder Singh, welcome to the Vaisakhi London Podcast. Waheguru Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you very much for having us. Great to have you. We've been eagerly awaiting you to come here on this podcast. So, Harwinder, you started with the Sikh Education Council a number of years ago. So can you tell me a little bit about its mission and what it's promoting and that kind of Sikh principles of empowerment and education?
So Sikh Education Council has been around since 1983. We formally registered in 1989, but we exist to help explain the Sikh way of life to a range of different audiences. A lot of our work is obviously internal within the Sikh community, but we do a lot of work with government orgs, with other bodies, with corporates, predominantly with educational institutions. So it all revolves around understanding the Sikh way of life, what it's about, and trying to see how Sikhi actually is a living, breathing way of life, and it has solutions for everyday problems that we're facing as a society. So that's what we try to work on, and we try to do that mainly through the written word. So we publish a lot of research and work, but we also then go through talks and then down the more modes like this podcast. I'm quite pleased to be here, part of the Vaisakhi in the square.
Yeah. So if we look at the historical context of Sabgare Khalsa, I mean, we're in an exhibition space as well that starts from 1672, goes all the way over to 1843. It's a big question, and I know this is not easy to answer in the time that we've been allotted, but how did a Sikh empire come to be, and how did it come under the patronage of Maharaja Ranjit Singh? Now, I know it's going to be a bit more of a whistle-stop tour as opposed to that in-depth conversation around this. But from your experience and some of the things that you teach in the Sikh Education Council, how did Sabgare Khalsa even come to be in the first place? Because of course there's a back history and there's a lead up to that actually coming into ways.
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that. I mean, in the Sikh Studies course that we teach in year 1, it's around about 7 or 8 hours leading up to the moment of Maharaja Ranjit Singh entering Lahore and being declared as Maharaja. So there's 8 hours worth of content that you go in detail. Whistle Stop Tour really takes us, if you get backwards in time, it's a little easier. So in 1801, Maharaja Ranjit Singh is declared the Maharaja Sikh Punjab, and a kingdom is declared. Prior to that, there was still a Sikh Raj in the Punjab that on and off ruled from about 1747. Its height was in the 1780s and the 1790s, and we call that the Missile period, and that's because it was a confederacy. So you had 12 different missiles. A missile is essentially a grid that looks after a certain region or a certain geographical area. You had 12 of these missiles who were all ruling, but they all collectively came together to determine what foreign policy looks like, what monetary policy they'd like, what their defense was going to look like, and they would be responsible for defending their particular area. But then they would also they would come to each other's rescue, if you like, or help when they were being hit by invaders. So for around half a century before Ranjit Singh's rise, you have this confederacy that is starting to build what it looks like to rule in the subcontinent from a Sikh point of view. Now they were only able to do that because, going back further, from 1710 to 1716, there was what we know as the first Khalsa Republic. So the first Khalsa Republic is founded by a man called Harwinder Singh, who is instigated to do so by Guru Gobind Singh himself. Now his republic is not a nation state in the way that we think of it today. It doesn't have a long period of stability, but the fact that they orchestrated rule, they set out laws, they had foreign starters who acted as a sort of police force, and most importantly, they levied revenue. So they were gaining taxes from people. Means that theirs is the first Sikh rule from 1710 to 1716. So that was a republic. That's what we would term it as, because it had one leader, the commander-in-chief, Harwinder Singh. But then that evolves into what we have with the missiles, which then evolves into Maharaja Ranjit Singh takes over. Now Ranjit Singh is able to take over because he comes from a family that is one of the 12 missiles, so the Shakar missile. And they were, at the beginning, they were one of the, let's call it, weakest missiles, which is not being impolite, it was one of the smaller missiles. But over 2 generations, Yonghi's predecessors, Chak Singh and Mahar Singh, they grew to be the strongest missile. But Ranjit Singh's father, as the head of the missile, dies when Ranjit Singh was 12 years old. So he's very young when he takes over. But that kind of led him and drove him, and he was incredibly influenced by his mother-in-law, Rani Sadapur, who really held his hands on what rule should look like and how he should usurp that role. So bringing to a close kind of that whistle-stop tour, how is it that he gets to win? Well, basically, he set up alliances and he married into families that were all powerful, that controls the other missiles. And in so doing, he became the most powerful missile leader. So much so that following wars that took place over control of Lahore, up until 1799, where Ranjit Singh participated and was ultimately the one who was most successful. In 1799, he walked into Lahore with his armed force and took control of the whole of the city, and by 1801 was then unopposed by any other Sikh missile leader, any other group, as well as any other power in the subcontinent. And so the Raj basically begins.
Oh wow, we did it in like 10 seconds, but
Like relatively
5 minutes as opposed to 8 hours.
Yeah, that's the elevator pitch version. Let's call it that.
Absolutely. So, in terms of Maharaja Ranjit Singh coming into power, you explained that you've had the historical context that led to that journey, that also led to almost like a conquering in a way, or at least an unopposed assertion of Sikh sovereignty. What happened next there? What was the mahar or the environment under Maharaja Ranjit Singh?
So Maharaja Ranjit Singh's book is all about establishing Gurmat principles that you're then able to tease out and apply to what rules. So while on the face of it, many people look into someone like Maharaja Ranjit Singh and see some facets of his personal life and even some facets of rule that they don't particularly like. What's key to appreciate and understand is that Ranjit Singh, as Yogani, as the Gurmats I've read to him every day, he's a serious scholar of Gurmats. And he's trying to tease out, well, what does that look like? What is the Gurmat practice of over people? What does law and order look like in the house of Guru Nanak? And what that looks like is providing egalitarian perspectives in terms of opportunity for people to rise up ranks, so whether it's in the civil service or the armed forces, or whether you're doing so in business or furthermore, it's giving people peace of mind that they have the number one thing we're looking for, which is peace and security. If the people who say they rule over you, to whom you're paying taxes, can't defend you, then you're not living in a rule of law that you want to live in. They can't do the very basic thing. So very tribal takes something that goes back for us for millennia.
Yeah.
If the person is looking after you, can't protect you, there's no point in you being in that rule of law. So Ranjit Singh's number one was to protect people, provide a protected space, and to defend them, which he did incredibly well. But then it was to provide them with access to opportunity, and it was to provide them with education, and it was to provide them with better healthcare. And this all, like I said, is teased out from the principles that you're looking after people and you're looking after their best interests, but you're doing it for all people. You're not just doing it for your people. So quite notoriously, the Sikh population when Ranjit Singh takes over in Punjab is less than 20%. And the predominant ways of life are not as black and white as we see them today. To say it's Hindu or Muslim or even Sikh the lines were very blurred. But all of these people who are, let's say, non-Sikh, non-adherents of the Guru, those people, he looks after them just as if they were a Sikh. So it's Sikh rule in principle, it's Gurmat inspired rule, but it's rule for everyone and all and sundry. So that's what he really tried to aim and do, and he did that very well for the 3 decades.
And what's been the evidence or the feelings, the sentiment, the public sentiment around how people felt under his leadership? What was that? Do we have any evidence?
Yeah, so there's so much that's passed down through the oral tradition of people. This is why as a Sikh community, we revere Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Despite, like I said, some schools of thought or some of us as individuals might look at his personal life and pick out some flaws and foibles. As a community, and even individually, we still look at him and revere him. And it's not because this guy is rich or because he was the Maharaja. It's because of that old tradition that was passed down. That this was an individual who really understands Guru Nanak's philosophy, looking after everyone and doing the best by everyone. And so that sentiment is always one of Maharaja Varda or Jamia. And you can go to YouTube today and find people recording vlogs in modern day Pakistan, Punjab, who will make statements where they say things like, Sardarji, Maharaja Varga Morke Awayat, that's what we want in Pakistan. We want a Ranjit Singh born again, because that's the rule that we all want. Subcontinent, whether it's Pakistan or Hindustan, has a lot of political issues, and a lot of people, certainly in the Punjab on both sides, remember that time. That sentiment has passed the test of time. But people remember and say it was a time where you felt protected, and you felt that even if you practiced a way of life that was distinct from what the Maharaja himself believed, or the ruling class, the Khalsa believed, you were still taken care of and looked after and allowed. Not only allowed, it was your way of life was flourishing. So under Ranjit Singh's rule, every time, it's a colloquial saying, but it's largely true to fact. If Maharaja Ranjit Singh builds a Gurdwara, he builds a masjid or a mosque or a mandir in the same thing. Because he said, well, these people need to be catered for too. And so that sentiment is what lasts for people, that he's a man of the people who cares for people. And you find this then even in the written tradition. So you find accounts of people from the Punjab who talk about Ranjit Singh and write stories about his interactions with everyday people. Just to share one of them as an example, one of the most kind of telling stories of Maharaja Ranjit Singh was passed down now through the Kandi tradition, is that on spell of great famine, the state granary would be opened, the people would come, and there'd be a system by which you would be fed. So you would be given grain and rice or predominantly vegetables that you could take away, and it would be one fund at a certain size that you were allowed to bring, unfurl it, and you'd have stuff placed in it, take it and put it back. And an elderly gentleman has come with his young grandson, stands there in queue in line, everything's, puts up his chadar, everything's placed in there, and he then says to the Sardar who's filling it all and doing all the checking off that this is a citizen who's allowed to take this, he says, Sardarji, si go Johnny, there's 2 of us, the young grandson is here too, and we brought a second chad that lays it out. That one starts getting filled, and the Sardar says, yep, okay, 2 of you, that means it's an extended household, we'll fill that up. And as they fill them up and they're tied up together, the elderly man starts tearing up and starts crying. And from a distance, another Sardar comes to see why there's a hold up, because the queue's going longer. And he comes over and he says to the old man, को ਇੱਥੇ ਖਾਬ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਤੇ ਰੋਦਾ ਕਾਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ ਚੰਗਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੱਗਦਾ like Ranjit Singh's Raj in this time of famine opened his doors to the state primary queue and the old man says nay Ranjit Singh jug jug jue may live forever in his Raj we're living in a swamp because I'm tearing up because my son was a soldier who fought and died under Ranjit Singh in the armed forces. If he were here today it would be so much easier for me to carry the 2 funds and go home. And the Sardar says to him, he said, Baba, he go there, can the chal main tera poke match in neck one. And so the grandfather, like in shock, this Sardar picks up the pond, puts it on his head, the other one in his hand, and walks all the way to his village. And makes his way to the village, the elderly man and the young little kid running in front of him. We all just, happily wind him through the roads. They get to the village, and as they get to their house, that kind of gathering of people emerges around them, and the Sardar does his salam, puts the funds down and leaves, and the whole villagers walk around and said, what the hell happened? Where did you go? How did this transpire? The only man doesn't understand. He says, what are you talking about? They said, how did you get Maharaja Ranjit Singh to bring your funds to the house? And the only man breaks down, gets to the floor and says, that was Maharaja Ranjit Singh. He had a bukkar, he had a chadar over his head. He was just another Sardar. But that's the kind of Maharaja Ranjit Singh was. Those stories stand the test of time, as we said. They're in the written tradition as well as the oral tradition. And that sentiment then survives for us, where you say, that's the kind of Maharaja he was. The man of the people, woman of the people, who stands by what they exist for, and nothing is beneath them. They're capable of doing everything that they expect their civil servants to do and their employees to do.
Well, it's really difficult for us to imagine that, because I think when we think of state leaders, we think of security, or we think of a king, we think of, a great palace, for example. And I know that did exist at the same time as well. But what do you think creates that kind of humility? Is it just the principles of Khalsa Raj and Gurmukh and his teachings that he had that enabled him to stay so close to the people, as well as be somebody with a lot of authority as well, all that authority?
It's the best question to ask, because we hear these stories, we then start counterbalancing a golden throne, a giant palace, and a lot of us like those things. We say, look, we had a Raj, it's a symbol of our rule, and it's so extensive, it's so beautiful. What you have to come down to answer your question is, everything stems from the Guru. Everything. Ranjit Singh's Raj is symbolic of Guru Granth Sahib, Guru Panth Khalsa. And Ranjit Singh is a product of that. And so, as I said at the top, that should never be removed from anyone's psyche when they think about Maharaja Ranjit Singh. He has the Guru Granth Sahib read to him on a daily basis for 1 hour minimum, every day. And he's saying, Karo, suno. He patronizes other, he patronizes pundits, he patronizes thinkers, sons, all sorts of people. But he never ever loses sight of the fact that the Guru is behind everything he's doing. And when he has to shove Guru Red to it, it's not saying he's just sitting there, I have peace of mind. It sounds beautiful. It's about him hearing it and then saying, how do I put that into practice, application? How do I apply this teaching? How do I apply this knowledge? And how will it help me? And over 3 decades, he was able to do that incredibly well. And, obviously there may be areas where he doesn't do so well, or he makes mistakes and he's learning. That's the journey of the sect. Because you're always learning from the Guru.
I think we often base, oral absolutism on people, right? That they as a leader have to be absolutely perfect, right? But he's not a Buddha, he's not perfect. But at the same time, he did create a whole movement or a whole society, civilization that we're talking about still. 2025. So in the Sikh Education Council course that you do, this features obviously big course. What happens after that then? So what led to the end of the Raj, and why do you think that was the case? Again, the big question, many factors, some of our previous guests have attempted to answer those questions from an economic standpoint or from a political standpoint, but what do you teach in the Sikh Education Council?
I mean, you've already answered one part of it. There's numerous factors. There's no one factor that's overriding beyond the others. What's key for what we try to teach at Showcase is how can we learn from what you might perceive to be a mistake that's made at that time, that means that the rule does not continue, that it doesn't subsist. And so from that angle, what you start to perceive is that whilst the ideology of Gurmat is being applied, there's areas where it's not being applied. Moreover, the concept of a term I used already, Khalsa Panth, is that people should rise positions by merit. And towards the end of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's reign, there is an incredible number of people who are where they are by merit, but there is also a growing breed of people who are in the positions that they're in purely because they are from, one, a diverse background. So it seemed to be, well, let's have some people who are from this background, and this background, and this background. So modern day kind of DEI.
I was going to say, it's very common.
And then second part, there is a huge number of people that are from Ranjit Singh's bloodline. This is the one that ends up taking over the narrative, that his bloodline, the nepotism that was shown to people to rise up and take those positions. But in our opinion, the major part is that a system, or if you like, processes were not established and finitely produced in black and white. They weren't prepared, they were presented, but they weren't necessarily embedded, which is something that we as a community continue to suffer from until the modern day, right now. We exist on personalities, and even when we have written documents or papers and articles and ideas of what we're going to try to profess, how as a community we're going to organize ourselves, we tend not to follow the processes, we tend not to follow the system. We don't even give the system birth. We don't say here's what the system looks like, here's the institution, here's how we're going to follow it. Instead we drive on the basis of personality. Now that's something that over the last 50 years to 100 years, there have been attempts, particularly by the Sikhs over there, to try and bring about that kind of change. And the institutions we have in Punjab today, Shiromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee, the SGPC, which looks after all Sikh institutions and places of historical importance, Shiromani Akali Dal Sikh political party, they are products of that environment. But they become corrupt because they don't continue to follow the processes of the system, they become personality-led. So we've had some attempts at doing that, but it's almost as if as a community we just don't want to take that learning on, that it's about the process, it's about the system, it's about the writing, it's not about the personality who's involved. Now, that's what we try to do at the Sikh Education Council, so hence we do a lot of writing and publishing at an academic level and even at a lower than academic level, so to the everyday reader. There's other organizations who do this quite a lot as well in this country, particularly from a political angle. Organizations like National Sikh Youth Federation, who I know had a exhibition that was here at Vaisakhi in London last year. They're very good at trying to present writing in this scope. There was a group that you interviewed here earlier as part of the podcast series, Azadi Gunga, who put out something a few years ago called the Azadis Manifesto, which is another great attempt at trying to put into black and white what should process these systems look like. All of this stems from attempts to try and turn the rut that we have been stuck in since 1849. We are still living in that era. We're living in 1849. We haven't moved on from that moment. It's the same time.
So, in Sikh Education Council, let's talk a bit then again about your kind of content that you flow into there after Maharaja Ranjit Singh. What is the kind of the modern day understanding of what we could take then from that Raj and how we can apply it? Because you mentioned there's quite a few different organizations that are attempting to do that, kind of create it into some sort of structure that makes sense for us to move forward as a community. But again, it's got a unified force. It's often in different kind of segments of society, but smaller groups. So how would you say Sabdari Khalsa, from that period, of course, lineage and history that comes before it, how can we then apply that in a modern day, even as individuals?
So when we teach the course at year one, it's taught chronologically, even though we cover different elements of culture and ideology at different times.
Yeah.
When we leave the Ranjit Singh era and the demise of the Khalsa Sarkar, we mainly focus on this reform period.
Yeah.
We'll take Singh Sabha Lehar mainly, then other groups, and then evolves to the modern day, how Sikhs deal with partition of Punjab, and then migration into foreign territories, and then vis-a-vis dealing with India and Pakistan. What we try to kind of emphasize is this idea that as a Sikh community, wherever you go, it's possible for you to live comfortably in any form of rule or community in society and continue to practice your way of life and be a productive member of that society.
Yeah.
What's key is always having the Guru as your base, as your foundation, and the focus, the object of your discourse. If you do that, then you will never come across a problem. It will always go a certain way and it will be successful. Where we try to emphasize we can make changes to modern day society within the Sikh community and outside of it too, is, as I said, through kind of writing and publishing and reviewing that. But I actually wrote one paper, but as a group we published a lot of work on the idea of everything shouldn't be housed in one unified space. So alluding to what you said there. So the paper I wrote was dispelling the myth of unity. It's actually a myth that in the Sikh world everything needs to be unified. The Missile Confederacy period was a great example of that. Each one of the missiles had their own enmity within each other, and that competitive spirit actually drove them to do better. They wanted their citizens in their region to speak the best about their way of practicing rule. Yeah. So I'd say it's even the same for today. I mentioned 2 organizations. I could have mentioned another 5 in addition to ourselves as well. I think we need about 100 organizations who are writing and saying, what do the practices of Gurmat look like to resolve the issues that are the burning issues for us today? Yeah. And those burning issues are not just issues that are insular, that are internal basic, issues that everybody suffers from, like we have a huge problem with waste refuse around the globe, but even in the United Kingdom, that we're seeing at this moment in time in 2025, focused in the West Midlands in Birmingham.
Yes.
We know that.
Yeah, we know that.
And waste refuse is a huge problem.
It's a big problem.
What are the societies around the world doing about consumerism, rampant consumerism that causes so much waste? And then what are we doing about waste? Believe it or not, Gurmat has responses to all of these issues. Why are we as Sikh not putting those out there? That's what we focus on. That's what we try and teach our students. That's what we want you to do, is go out there, read Gurmani, read Shabads, read more history, work these things up, get together in discourse with other people, and start looking at this and say, well, how can we resolve these issues? That's just one example that's very poignant today. At the council, we worked on projects like homelessness, education, access of education for people who come from deprived backgrounds, particularly when they go to places in higher education. So it's trying to look for those kind of areas that we can try and provide some form of solution.
And like you said, there's a solution pretty much to all maybe sustainability issues around the world, right? I mean, we have, for example, the Sustainable Development Agenda. I think it's 50 or 70 different goals that are aiming to improve development. But all of that can be traced back to Sikh as well.
Totally. Our concern is, not just from the council, I think as the Panth in this country, the United Kingdom, is that we're actually helping provide some of the solutions and provide some of the knowledge that the rest of the world just doesn't have. Now, somebody's allowed to disagree with me from a non-Sikh background and say, I think we've got lots of solutions, we're just not implying them or whatever else. That's fine. I'm telling you, though, that from a Sikh perspective, as a Sikh of the Guru, the House of Guru Nanak gave us everything we need. Everything's there. We just are very, very bad at teasing it out and saying, look, here's a solution. You can resolve this idea, this issue. Then it's not always about providing resolutions. Sometimes it's just about providing triggering thoughts or about providing some level of impetus and just having your best intent. Again, another good example is the recent discussions that took place over the last 6 months about assisted dying. It was quite telling that there were very few Sikh voices wanting to opine on this issue. And it's because very few of us are qualified to do so. We think
Yeah.
And it's because we haven't looked into it enough. And I'm always, and this is what we're trying to urge everyone, you hear a sect of the Guru and you read the Shabad, that makes you qualified if you start engaging in discourse with the Sangha and you start putting these ideas out.
I think the fear then comes home is, my interpretation is not correct to you. I think people feel an insecurity to speak up as a messenger. You don't even need to be a messenger, you just have to be a prior. So is this what the Sikh Education Council is doing, especially through its forces as well, is to encourage people to have a voice and interpret Gurbani, interpret Gurmat as something that can apply to modern day, which it does.
Entirely. So we run a quarterly seminar, so every 3 months we have a public facing seminar. Anyone can come, RSVP and attend. We have 2 papers presented at that seminar, but it's an open platform and forum where you get to challenge the papers that are being presented. They're on wide-ranging topics for that reason. So we try and provide that forum where people can come and feel they're in a safe space. Our course does that to a large extent, but the space isn't, because it's part lecture, you don't always have the time for that. The seminars do that, and then conferences that we put on do that, so that people can feel safe and say what they want to say. You can argue, you can debate robustly and have a difference of opinion. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, robust debate and discussion takes us further, because you start seeing how passionate someone feels about something and you're able to really buy into something. But where the problem comes in our community a lot, and many other communities, is you start taking things personally, or it becomes, well, you don't know what you're talking about because of this or because of that. We really step back from that. We try and provide the platform where everyone has an equal footing in the Q&A session to say what they want. You provide a rebuttal, we have a riposte, we have critical debate. And whenever we find out there's an organization or a new startup somewhere where somebody has written something and published something, we make inroads immediately. I usually personally will contact those people through whatever channel they're on a website or social media, to say, I've seen what you've got, we have a published written copy, can we engage with you at some point? If you ever need any help, let us know. If you have any assistance, if you think there's a paper you can present at one of our seminars to bring that on. So that's what we see as our role, really. We also offer pretty much every group that's out there that does something like that, protection. So we'll say, if someone comes and starts hassling you, involve us at any level you want. We know a lot of the organizations here. We've been around for 40 years. So we know how to speak to people and say, look, let them say what they're saying. I mean, you've got to be very careful about how you say what you're saying, so that's for every organization out there, including us. But, we try to provide that space where we say, look, we can talk to people on your behalf. So it doesn't just become a so it doesn't become you, me, us. It becomes, this is all about trying to advance society.
Moving the agenda forward, moving the thinking forward, and having those spaces to be able to conversate with each other, have a debate with each other, and I think, from a personal perspective, I think that's where a lot of conversations are shut down, right? Because people don't allow other people to tell their opinion, especially when it comes to Sikhi, right? And that's super important. I want to talk very quickly about this course, right, that you're talking about. It's a 4-year course, which is essentially longer than a degree. It is a degree, is it a degree?
It's not a degree program. In fact, there's no, at the end of each year, there's no certification or anything you get for it. We've had over 1,000 people undertake the course at year 1. And what people gain is the knowledge and the education. We are moving forward now towards certification, but it's very difficult to get into a degree program at this level. What we provide, though, is the first year is a 15-week course, 1.5 hours each week. And once it takes you through this chronological journey of history, culture, and ideology. Once you pass through that, you go into year 2, which is modular studies. We advise the students to come on to that. There's 12 modules. We advise them to take 2 to 3 years to do it. So they don't come every single month, they take a few months off. And it's because the amount of, it's very focused work on certain topics, including a whole module on Sikh polity. So what politics looks like in the Sikh lexicon. And studying it, and so you do that. Then you move on to year 3, which is entirely a political and practical study of Sikhi, and then year 4, which takes you on to full-scale writing a whole thesis at the end of your studies.
Wow! So it sounds quite exhausting, in terms of you going through it. I remember doing A-level RE, and I did Sikhi and that, and it was I thought, this is way longer and way more in depth from what I'm hearing, right?
The reading involved when you get to things like the year 2 modular studies and year 3 is quite intensive. And so a lot of people won't take that on. They'll do year 1 where we're able to do minimal pre-reading, come for that. Yeah. But the idea of everything we do is everything we teach is referenced. We try to introduce people to, we present a Falkat Maryata, so the idea of what mainstream Sikhi says, but we present what different schools of thought say about different ideas. Yeah. And so that's why it's important to reference. So we give people, well, you can go and do your own study now. And you can look at what this school of thought says or what that school of thought says. Particularly when you get to a topic like Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the Sarkar Khalsa, it's where there's so much, there's an absolute brevity of information even published about it, is so that people can go and do their own research, their own work for their own benefit.
And what type of students do you get on these courses?
So for many years up until pre-COVID, we started teaching in 2008 and we were just housed in universities. Yeah. So we teach through the student union, we're accredited to do that, and we go to different universities each year. We would have maybe Sikh Society students, as other students who come along as well. So they make you students in higher education. But then just before COVID, we started teaching in Southall and Birmingham to professionals and non-university students. So we had quite a lot of good success with that. And so today we teach to anyone who wants to attend. Yeah. We get, the oldest student I've taught was a retired pensioner at 69, and the youngest students we've taught are 60. So we don't take anyone under 60.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. So there's a whole breadth of people, and not just Sikhs, right? It's across the board.
And I mean, it's 90 to 95% Sikh, but then it's 5 to 10% of non-Sikh people who are taking an interest and come into it for some reason. Okay. And what we find is the Sikh that we're teaching are all from very different backgrounds. So we have people who come from a Khalsa background, families all taking Kandili Bahul, and then we'll have people who know nothing about Sikhi but want to learn something about it. But say they come from a Sikh background, whatever that means.
And whatever that variation of multitude of different experiences that people have, right? They'll come together. Okay, so we are getting to the end of this conversation, but I want to ask you, what is your call to action for the next generation? Because education, as we've explored in the Samgane Khalsa and before, in the whistle-stop tours throughout that, is education is key, right? Education and understanding your history is super, super important in understanding the challenges of the modern day. So what would be your call to action as Sikh Education Council, and what do you would encourage listeners of this podcast to be doing to understand more about history?
I don't know how popular it's going to be, but the main thing is we encourage everyone to read, write, publish, review. Read, write, publish and review. And then to engage in discourse over that. So if you're not engaging in critical review of your own written work, there's no point in doing it. But if you're not writing in the first place or reading to engage information, and there's lots of different modes to write in now. You don't have to write academically, you don't have to write for a magazine, you don't have to write anything for a blog. You could be writing a Jake's spread, you could be writing a Fred spread, you could be writing a TikTok feed. You could be doing something for a PowerPoint presentation in a school or in a corporate environment for an environment like today. All of it requires you though to have a good grasp over the written word, which requires you to have what we want our call to action essentially is for us to communicate to develop again a culture of learnedness. Now, talking about Ranjit Singh's Raj and the Sarkari Khalsa, it was known for that. The literacy rates were incredibly high, and one of the things that they were really trying to encourage people to do was learn and learn from everyone. Ranjit Singh's artillery has generals from Europe who are coming to enhance them and bring them into the modern era. They have teachers from Europe and the Far East who are coming to teach different ways of thinking. Ranjit Singh Darbar itself becomes a hotbed of different philosophies and thinkers to come and engage in discourse and to be found out as well as lauded when they say something right. That kind of culture needs to be brought back again. Unfortunately, just because of the way we've developed now, particularly in recent decades, post 2000, like the millennial movement, a lot of us are thinking less about going to university. Not that that's the only route, but this culture we had, perhaps you and I and a lot of the people who are listening to this podcast had, go to university, try and study. You can't get to university, good, that's up to you. And try and have a body of study that you're doing, systematic study. we've lost that a lot. The number of students from a Sikh background attending universities, particularly Russell Group universities, has gone down year on month, which is very disappointing for us at the council. We've obviously that culture of learnedness increase, and for fora to develop where people can sit and engage in conversation with one another. The proverbial langar hall needs to be built anew, and very few of our institutions have that. So that's our call to action, and we live in an era where you can do that virtually. So if you don't get the opportunity to do that in your space, in your locale, you can do that virtually. You can come to events like ours once a quarter, once every 3 months. Find a group of people, your tribe, that will be similar to you. Read on something, or what do you think about this, what do you think about that? So that's our call to action.
So it's essentially recreating, I mean, I suppose in the modern day, those spaces of speaking essentially are online nowadays, because even people in the same community or the same locality are still communicating online. Obviously, we want to bring some of that physical interaction back, because that's super important to have those conversations with each other, but in a safe space that allows a multitude of voices, that's a multitude of opinions coming from a learning background as well.
Yeah, this is where we really urge people to do those things in person for that reason. You have no idea if someone is offline. You don't get the body language we're getting there having this conversation. So you don't look in the white people's eyes. Virtual works when we have no other option. Otherwise, the more we do this, the more we break bread with one another, the better those conversations are.
And I think that conversation probably points to a deeper issue, societal issue of connection, and connection with one another in a space that is moving more and more virtual. I mean, we could be continuing this conversation. Fascinating hearing from your understanding of the history and what you also put across in the Sikh Education Council. It sounds like something I want to go on. I think I've been saying this to every single guest, that you've all convinced me of coming onto your either your platform, your education. We had Sovereign Minds on, for example. We've had Gunga Azadbi, and it's all piqued interest of mine just to learn more. And I think that's the principle, or at least the mission of this podcast, is to encourage people to want to learn more, and reach out more, and actually educate ourselves further in this mission of life that we're in, and trying to contribute in the world that we're in. So, Harwinder Singh, thank you so much. Insightful perspectives. We've looked at the ideological and educational foundation with Khalsa Raj, and I'm going to end by saying understanding these principles not only honours our heritage, but also guides us in building futures, in justice, equality, and collective responsibility. Thank you so much for joining, and wishing you education.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Why do you keep us outside? Why do you keep me from us?